Hey all here, OS Reviews. You're watching our video comparison between the Huami Amazfit Bip versus the Amazfit Pace 2, also known as the Stratos smartwatch. This is Xiaomi's newest wearable, and it retails for about $200 or $300 for the deluxe version with sapphire crystal and a leather strap, making it currently the most expensive model in their collection of smartwatches. The Bip is their most affordable smartwatch that has a touchscreen display and has very similar functions for the average consumer, whereas the Bip is now selling for around $60 to $70. Again, this thing is almost 3 times the price. So the question here is whether the Bip is really all you need to get by compared to the more expensive Stratos. And we taking a look at some of the differences in the software and design in this video. So let's begin with the design. Of course, the Stratos has a more premium look, but it also comes at the expense of added bulk and heft. Obviously, it has more powerful internals, including a larger display. It has a dual-core processor, 4 gigs of built-in storage, versus the Bip, which has mostly undisclosed processing as well as chipsets inside. It definitely has a lower spec processor because the transitions between the pages, as you can see here, definitely feels a little bit choppy, but it's not a huge deal, and as you start using it, you definitely get used to it versus slightly more fluid transitions on the actually Android-powered Stratos compared to the Bip, which is running on a proprietary operating system that Xiaomi has designed just for this watch. You can see that in terms of the thickness, however, the Stratos is considerably thicker, and that may be a con for maybe women or guys with smaller wrists versus the Bip, which is one of the smallest and the lightest smartwatches on the market still. In my opinion, this is actually a huge benefit because you can wear it and it almost feels like you're wearing nothing at all. It's comfortable, it's light, and doesn't distract from day-to-day use. However, I can't deny that the Stratos has a more professional look. So if you're a businessman, if you're a professional, then this might give you a slightly classier look. The Bip is not bad at all. It also has a Corning Gorilla Glass display that is nicely protected and has 2.5D curved glass that still makes swiping and navigation feel quite responsive. So both of these, in my opinion, have pretty clean and elegant overall designs. The body of the Bip is mostly made out of a polycarbonate plastic, but it feels relatively sturdy versus the Stratos, which is made out of carbon fiber. So you have definitely a more sturdy build on the Stratos. The back both feature optical heart rate sensors as well as contact pins for the charging. Both of these will charge up in under 2 hours, and battery life is an area where the Bip still wins. It will easily last you a month before you need to recharge it with regular use versus the Stratos, which will only last you about a week before you need to recharge it. Granted, both of these figures are already quite long for any smartwatch. Compared to the Apple Watch, which can only get you a day and a half of battery life, these are both already excellent. But I have to say that the Bip, which again you only have to charge basically 12 times a year, just feels like a regular timepiece. The watch bands of both are made out of silicone and they are adjustable, so you can swap it out for future accessories as well as different designs or leather straps if you don't like what's included right out of the box. So going into the menu and the software side of things, first of all, both of these watches do have a e-paper display. It's similar to e-ink in the sense that it's a transflective LCD, and when you're outdoors, when you're pointing it at the sun, you can still make out everything on the display. It's fully legible, and it's one of the better attributes of most of Amazfit's wearables is that they are always on screens that not only work well indoors but also look great outdoors. So you don't have to tap on anything to wake the screen up. It's always going to be displayed, and it almost looks like a regular watch. So tapping on the crown keys on both will turn on the backlights and wake up the watches from their sleep state and allow you to then interact with the touchscreens and swipe through the various menus. We can tell that they're based on the same type of design philosophy and ecosystem, but there are some differences, of course, in terms of the complexity and the amount of data that you can visualize on both watches. With the Stratos, just like on the Pace, you have more complex menus, and if you tap on the things, you can actually get a more detailed view and graphs directly displayed on the watch, since the processor is powerful enough to handle those types of tasks. On here, it's a lot more simple. You can only see things like steps as well as basic functions like heart rate, and to get a more complete view, you have to sync it with your phone and then view back the information from there. Overall, it's not a huge deal breaker, at least in my opinion, because even though you can see more details and statistics on the Pace and the Pace 2, to be completely honest, the screen on a smartwatch is still going to be secondary to your smartphone, which is why when you're monitoring and reviewing your activity, you're probably doing that with the app anyways, and as a result, I think that the Bip is sufficient. Regardless, you do have a slightly larger screen on the Pace, which is slightly easier to read. The process of changing the watch faces are a little bit different on both of these watches. So on the Stratos, you simply long hold on this main screen, and just like on an Android Wear or Android powered smartwatch, you have access to these different faces I can then tap to change it to. And otherwise, I can also exit out of apps by swiping over from the edge. And this particular gesture is actually the same that we saw on the Bip. So also with the Bip, if I'm in a specific app, let's say selecting something, I can go out of it by swiping over from the edge. So that particular gesture is carried over on both watches. To switch the watch face on the Bip, what you have to do is actually dig a little bit deeper. It's not quite as convenient, unfortunately. Go into the settings, and then afterwards you have the ability to kind of find the watch face that you like by swiping up and down. And once I see something that I'm satisfied with, I can tap on it and confirm it, and that will actually save it to the main menu and change the design. All in all, though, you have about the same amount of watch faces on both at the moment. They both are restricted to roughly 15 to 18 depending on the software version that you're running, and you can also control it using the companion app. The original Pace did have slightly more watch faces, but the Pace 2, which is using a redesigned app, actually has a few less at the moment. But again, you can customize between different looks. Both of them have analog and digital looks. Both of them can display additional information like weather, steps, heart rate at a quick glance, which are both quite useful. I found the crown keys on both of the units to be also quite responsive. The Bip has always had a pretty good crown key that was better than the original Pace, which was very small and recessed. On here, it's easy to tap on and to hold, and tapping on it once turns on the backlight and again makes the touchscreen more responsive. On here, again, we have an oversized crown key, which is easy to tap, but it's also flanked by two more keys that takes you left and right between different menus, and when I'm in a specific app, it also takes me up and down through different lists. So it definitely is slightly more easy to kind of navigate and use with these two additional keys. It gives you a secondary option of navigating the software without having to interact with the touchscreen directly. Alright, so next let's take a look at some of the other specific apps built onto both of these watches. On the Bip, we have access to this main page that tells you some basic statistics about how long you've been sitting, calories burned, distance walked, and your heart rate. And over here, we also can go into specific activities like biking, walking, so on and so forth for additional tracking, also with the built-in GPS chipset. What you'll notice here is that there are no ways to kind of track swim-based activities. Even though the Bip is fully waterproof, you can take it with you when you're showering or going to the beach. However, the Stratos does have swimming-based tracking as well. So it tells you your pace in a lapped swim, things like that. And it has 5 ATM, which is actually slightly better in terms of endurance underwater. So that's an area where you get some extra tracking functions, up to 11 types of sport activities with the Stratos that you don't get quite as many with the Bip. Next, we do have access to the weather forecast, which also basically requires a connection to your phone using Bluetooth to sync the information over. The Stratos or the Pace 2 does also have Wi-Fi, so if it's connected to the internet, it can pull up the information by itself. It's basically a standalone Android computer. So that is another difference, that it has Wi-Fi on board and Bluetooth, whereas the Bip is only restricted to Bluetooth. We do have also the same basic functionality, however, the ability to see the weather on the next page over. And afterwards, we can also take a look at alarm clock. So on here, you can see some additional features that we'll discuss in a second, but you have very similar functionality, the ability to toggle between alarms for different days of the week, turn them on or off, vibrations, things like that. What's interesting is that sometimes the animations are actually a little bit slower on the Stratos because it's trying to load and do so much, whereas the Bip, which has a very simple, straightforward interface, doesn't have any animations. It seems a little bit jumpy at first, but it actually is very consistent and actually quite snappy as you start using it. The next menu over is the compass, and after a few seconds you can see it displays a very similar interface overall. The Stratos does give you a few other details such as air pressure as well as elevation level, so there's some extra sensors on here that you don't get, but for basic compass and direction tracking, they're both are fairly similar in that regard. So let's go out of this particular app. And the next page over is actually a stopwatch. So on here we have a stopwatch function. On here it's right here, so I can tap on this to begin a stopwatch. Again, you can tell that the design language on both of these watches are very similar. And there's also a countdown timer on the Bip, which we also get over here in a separate panel on the Stratos. The Stratos does have a few extra pages in between, and what they do, one of them is actually for FM radio and internet radio, that you can create channels and save different bits of radio from the phone and then transfer it over after syncing it. There's also a separate panel for AliExpress or Alipay, which is mobile payment using NFC. So that is another unique feature on the slightly more expensive version. Here, there's also additional feature for creating a fitness package. It's basically a coach on your wrist, and it will tell you things like today you should reach 500 steps, and tomorrow you should reach maybe 10,000 steps, how many calories you're eating, things like that, that intelligently changes depending on your fitness and movement. So there is some additional tracking advanced features on here. Finally, the Stratos does have a Xiaomi Mi Home app built right on in. It allows you to control other smart home appliances such as light bulbs and smart speakers that are connected to the internet. And using the watch, you can now use it as a remote for controlling those things. So if you're invested into Xiaomi's smart home ecosystem, then the Stratos does have an extra trick up its sleeve that's actually quite useful, and it's a nice trick. But the Bip does not have that particular feature. It's just very centered on fitness, giving you time, as well as some basic notifications such as text messages and calls as they're coming in. And that's basically all the panels. The last one here is just for settings. As you saw, you can change the brightness of the display, you can change the wallpaper. Something to point out is on both of these versions, I have actually the Chinese software ROM. There are international versions for both that are in English, but you have basically the same experience. Something that you'll notice on the Bip is that there is no way to very quickly see how many hours you've slept. It does also do sleep tracking, and it does it very well, but this is one area where you have to sync it with your phone in order to take a look at hours slept. Both of these are done automatically, so you don't have to press any keys. Simply go to sleep, and after you don't move around as much, a few minutes of inactivity, it will detect that you've fallen asleep and then record your light versus deep sleep. But this is a good example of how with the Bip, it's a very simple, straightforward wearable, and if you want to look at more advanced statistics, you have to use your phone to pull that information up, which is still pretty easy to do. Whereas on the Stratos, just like on the Pace, it's more of a complete self-contained computer on your wrist, and you can actually access all that information directly by tapping and swiping. It's not going to be the fastest, the best experience in the world, but for the most part, it works. And from here, you can take a look at some of those swimming activities I was talking about, lap swims, as well as different types of motions like strokes, butterfly strokes, freestyle, things like that. It definitely gives you some additional sports that it will track a little bit better. When it comes to the accuracy of the tracking, both are actually respectable and roughly the same, I would say. Both will give you, again, the distance walked using the accelerometer. It can detect the motion of movements, and it's actually fairly precise. The pedometer functions on both give you roughly the same amount of steps after comparing it with a day or two of use. And at the same time, the syncing processes are both very straightforward. So once you have Bluetooth turned on the phone, when it's in close enough proximity, it will automatically connect and sync the data. Both of them can store up to a few weeks of data on board before the memory gets full, and you have to sync it again. So no real complaints there. When it comes to the sports activities, again, we are beginning a particular activity here on the Bip, and we can see that it gives you continuous heart rate data as well. So the heart rate sensors on both are fairly accurate, good enough, not medical grade, but as far as trackers go, there's really no difference in between them. The GPS chipset is definitely more powerful on the Stratos. In fact, it's better integrated. On the Bip, what I suspect is that it's also using the phone, since you'll have your phone in your pocket at most times when you're running, and the phone will probably be connected to the watch. It's also using the phone's GPS to basically track your location on a map, and then you can view it back. No real problems because they give you the same functionality at the end of the day, but on the Stratos, like I said, everything is a bit more contained. You also have that Wi-Fi chipset that's built right on in. It feels more like an actual separate computer or wearable than the Bip, which is more of a secondary companion device. But in terms of overall accuracy and performance of these sports and tracking, I would say they're about the same. Touchscreen responsiveness are about the same as well. They're both capacitive screens that work quite well. For notifications, they're also about the same. You can view back WeChat, Twitter, and Facebook messages as they come in after you turn on the option in the app, and afterwards you can read it. But you can't reply to messages. There is no built-in microphone on both, and there's also no way to answer phone calls directly unless you connect a Bluetooth headset. Otherwise, you can tell that the notification interface on the Stratos is more like Android Wear, so it's a bit more complex. You can swipe up to take a look at those messages, so it has a few more panels that you can interact with. It's easier to see and view back, even if there's no current notifications present, whereas on the Bip, it's only displayed when it comes in, and it's not quite as elegant as far as viewing back previous messages, things like that. So that's more or less it as far as the differences between the Stratos and the Bip. I would say that the Stratos, like I said, it's more like a dedicated unit. Is it worth 3 times the price? Well, that really depends on your use case. If you're someone who's a business professional, or if you're a sports enthusiast who wants those extra types of activities, if you're a swimmer, then the Stratos definitely makes more sense. It has, again, a more complete package that also includes a Wi-Fi chipset. It has onboard storage that allows you to store music and use it as an MP3 player. It has Alipay, which is NFC for mobile payment, and controlling Xiaomi smart home appliances. But when it comes down to the basic utilities such as sleep tracking, walking, running, jogging, things like that, and heart rate tracking, both of these watches basically do the same things, and the Bip is significantly cheaper while offering longer battery performance. So this hasn't really changed, with the original Pace versus the Pace 2. I would say that if you are on a budget or if you're a average consumer, the Bip is really all you need to get by as a low cost and actually really slim and impossibly long lasting wearable. However, if you do want those extra features, you want a more premium build, then the Pace 2 is definitely an improvement over the original. So thanks for watching this video comparison here at OS Reviews. This was a closer look at the differences and similarities between the Xiaomi Amazfit Bip and the Amazfit Stratos, also known as the Pace 2.